Greetings, Professor McKee here with a tutorial for Terra Invicta. We finance professors have hobbies, and one of mine is playing Terra Invicta. I'm creating a collection of tips I've learned while playing this game in case you want to have a study break. Today's guide is some advice about where to run the spoils priority. Now, I want to emphasize from the start, every country can run spoils, even countries you typically wouldn't want to run spoils in, like your main mega nation. The United States can run spoils, China can run spoils, France, the European Union can run spoils, and it'll work. You'll get lots of money, which is good for you. But there are some countries that are better at it than others, and I will eventually get to why. But before I do that, I wanted to explain why spoils is so powerful, because it comes from a core principle of finance, and I'm a finance professor, and we academics can't help but want to talk about our own field. So spoils is going to give us money immediately. If you read the tooltip, you receive 24.6 per control point if you run for each time you complete the spoils priority. The main competitor for spoils is funding, right next to it, and each completion increases the income per month that the country produces. The thing is, spoils gets you cash today, funding gets you cash over time. And eventually the increased income will equal the amount of cash you receive immediately, but it takes a long time. Some people have done estimates. The exact amount of time depends on things like how many bonuses you can stack on funding and spoils, because you can stack and you can stack a lot of bonuses on spoils. It's a lot harder to stack a lot of bonuses on funding. There's a few other things that increase spoils as well. So the number of years it takes to pay back that initial spoils that you're foregoing by putting it into funding instead is a long time. So let's say it's 2 years. That's a pretty conservative estimate. It's often going to be longer than that. But spoils is so good, we can be conservative here and it still looks amazing. So in finance, we call that length of time, that 2 years, the payback period, because that's how much time you need to pay back the initial investment. Now, we're not actually making an initial investment here, but there's an opportunity cost where we're foregoing the spoils amount to do funding instead. And it's effectively the same thing as paying that. Losing out on that money is the same as paying that expense. But the problem with the payback period as a decision rule for investment in finance is that it doesn't consider the time value of money. The cash we get today is more valuable than cash, say, 2 years from now, or over the whole span of that 2 years. And that's true not just in real life financial decisions, but it's true in Terra Invicta too, because, for instance, we can use that cash to buy orgs. This org would be great to buy if I had $2,000 today. If I have $2,000 2 years from now, this org is gone. It'll float out of the pool. I guarantee you it will. We would like to have cash immediately because it gets us value primarily from buying up orgs, but we will use the cash to support our infrastructure as well once we start actually building stuff in space. Now, the exact length of time that we are actually going to be setting them as equivalent to depends on us knowing the discount rate. And we need to know how much value we're losing for each unit of time. And now, in a real life financial issue, we would use the market interest rate as our discount rate. Terra Invicta doesn't really have a financialization of assets. We can't borrow and lend out assets to other people. And we can trade with factions, but that's not really the same thing. So we don't have an actual discount rate that's easy to determine, but it's there, and it sort of depends on how much value the things we could buy, like orgs, add. And I can assure you, orgs are very nice, so there's a lot of value here. But anyways, let's get back to Terra Invicta. Since spoils gets us lots of cash immediately, and that makes it really powerful, it actually is so powerful that in the early game and the mid game, it's the best way to get money. It's way better than funding, and there's not really any other major sources. Even very late in the game, when you start getting some space economy sources that will get you money, spoils is still really competitive. And another reason for that, which is also an economic financial principle, is that you don't really care about the environmental damage. Once you win the game, it's over. You don't have to live in the post-alien invasion world. The game's over. You turn off the game and leave. There's an economic principle here. I've actually used that principle in one of my published papers, but I won't get into that because one finance lesson per video. Now, there are a few additional features of countries that will make them more attractive. So if they have a resource region, so either an oil region or a mineral, well, it's a resource region, but it looks like it's basically representing mining. So I call it a mining resource region, kind of interchangeably. Each region that the country possesses, so U.S. has got oil region up here, they got an oil region in Texas, they got a resource region with Denver, resource region with Boise, Idaho, oil region for Alaska. So they've got a bunch of these resource regions. Each one will increase the flat amount of spoils that is created when you complete the spoils priority. Additionally, the lower your government score, the more the spoils priority will produce. So if you have a high government score, which the U.S. has high government score, then spoils will be less effective. If you have a low government score, like for instance, Venezuela, your spoils is going to be more effective in producing cash per completion. This sort of makes sense because it's a little bit harder to loot countries that have very good rule of law, which is sort of what the government score represents, versus a country that's, very authoritarian, basically a dictatorship. And then in terms of harm to your country, spoils shifts public opinion against you towards neutral, undecided. And that effect is stronger if you have high education. And people who are highly educated tend to be more upset about this behavior. So if you have a low education score in your country, that's actually beneficial. If you're running spoils, the negative effect from spoils is going to hurt you less. The public opinion effect is also stronger if you have a high government score. So again, you don't want high government score. It also increases inequality. Inequality hurts your cohesion. The higher your education score is, the worse the damage from the inequality is. As you can see, it's mitigated by education being below 10. So if you have low education, again, the damage to your cohesion from the higher inequality is also reduced. So there's all sorts of things pointing you towards do a low government score and also have a low education score. And ideally have resource regions. Again, I want to reiterate, before I go into some of the best candidates, don't be afraid to run spoils in the U.S. and China, European Union, all your whatever your favorite mega nation is. Yes, it's not as perhaps quite as efficient because maybe they have a high government score or they don't have very many resource regions. I don't think China has very many. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Actually, no, China's got a lot. Because, France doesn't have very many. I don't know if France has any. Yeah, France doesn't have any resource regions. Because, the extra cash is so good. And because they're so big, they have so much IP, they can run a lot of completions in a very short amount of time. So plenty of times I've needed a quick amount of cash to, say, buy a really nice org. And I just run spoils for a little bit in US or China or wherever I'm controlling, and I get them cash I need. But for a dedicated spoils nation you don't mind losing, there are a number of good candidates. I'm going to walk through a bunch of them, but if you have something else you think I've missed, let me know in the comment section, because there's a lot. And first up, and a very obvious one, is the Middle East. So the Middle East not only has lots of resource regions, like Saudi Arabia has a bunch of oil. There's lots of oil in the Middle East, right? So obviously we have lots of resource regions, but most of these countries have low government score. Authoritarian, and totalitarian, even lower. They not only have good resource regions, they have low government scores. Oh, and their education scores are pretty low too. Iraq's really bad, but like even the wealthier ones, 8, 7, 7. U.S. is up to 9. Countries in Europe and North America have like 9, well above 8 kind of levels. So these guys have lower education as well. So Saudi Arabia, Gulf states, UAE, Oman, even Iran and Iraq, these guys all have some nice resource regions, low government scores. Most of them are pretty stable. So Iraq is not, it starts with low cohesion, but all the other ones, well, I guess Iran is also kind of unstable too, but cohesion will come back up. But these guys, they have great cohesion. They have pretty high GDP. Like their unrest is going to drop to 0. Same with all of these guys. They have very high GDP per capita and also high cohesion. If you go a little bit north towards Central Asia, there's a couple of interesting choices here. So our favorite Kazakhstan, it's great for the boost. Well, it has 2 resource regions. It's authoritarian. It's decent GDP. It will get up to high cohesion once, as time passes. So Kazakhstan's actually a great country to run spoils too, as if it needed to be stronger. Like it's already so critical because of its boost. Now it's got the resource regions, and it's great for spoils too. Another interesting one is Azerbaijan. It's only got 1 region, but it is a resource region. It's authoritarian. It's got relatively low education. Like this is a decent choice for running spoils too. The other Caucasus ones aren't so great. Their government scores are higher, and they don't have resource regions. Over in North Africa, there's a couple of interesting choices too. So Algeria and Libya both have a resource region. Libya has some issues with unrest and cohesion, although over time it would increase to a very high amount. As you can see, the resting value right now is 7.2. But Algeria is in a better place in terms of the unrest, so you'd probably want to go there over Libya. And really, all the North African countries are quite a bit wealthier in terms of GDP per capita than the rest of the continent. And so they can all work pretty well, even though the rest of them don't have resource regions. But Egypt, of course, and they also have great government scores. Generally, these two are a little bit higher, but Egypt has a nice authoritarian score for that extra spoils income. There's the European Union countries. They're not particularly great here because they have that high government score. They don't have very many resource regions. They do have really high GDP per capita, though, so it's easy to keep unrest under control despite having kind of damage to your cohesion, and damage is going to be a lot. A couple of interesting ones that I think are probably the most attractive. Norway, they have a resource region. They also have really high income. Their GDP is so high that they're never going to have unrest, regardless of their cohesion. Ireland has incredibly high GDP per capita. It doesn't have a resource region, but it's basically impossible for Ireland to get any unrest. You'd have to drop it below 65,000 GDP per capita. And so the problem is that it has great government scores, so you're not going to get a lot of extra income from that. But there's some others too that have really high income, like Switzerland is well above that 65,000. A bunch of these countries are very close, even if they're not quite at the 65,000. Over in the Americas, there's not many good choices here. Canada is actually quite good because it has several resource regions and it's wealthy enough. And again, the main detriment for these wealthy developed countries is that they have high education and they have high government score. The rest of the Americas aren't particularly great. Some of them have resource regions, but they're just they have really bad unrest problems as is. They start out with really bad cohesion, even if eventually it would fix itself. And they're not super rich either. Venezuela's not doing too well. Even something like Chile, high government score, already has really high inequality, so it's going to be rough trying to hold on things. And education's not that low either. So it would be hard to keep unrest under control in many of these South American countries. I honestly, like, Canada is the only super interesting potential pick, and normally you would only do this if, say, you're using Canada to go after the U.S. Over in Asia, there's a few other options. Like, Australia is kind of similar to other wealthy developed countries. It has resource regions, unlike some of them. But again, bad democracy score, so high inequality is going to cause problems. Singapore is kind of like Ireland, super rich, high GDP per capita, so it can handle spoils even though it has a relatively high government score. And a lot of the other Asian countries have like really bad unrest problems. If they have these, assuming they have good government scores, or they don't have the regions to make them really super attractive. Although, of course, again, everything can work. It's just somewhat works better than others. Ultimately, I'd say just picking up someone in the Middle East is probably the best approach. But as I've kind of tried to walk through, there's a lot of other options you could pick. You don't feel like you have to pick someone from the Middle East and run spoils there. You can run spoils pretty much anywhere, as long as you have some IP to work with. So, next time you want to corruptly extract wealth from countries, head to the Middle East. If you found this video helpful for your study break, please comment, like, and or subscribe so that others can find this video too. Happy not studying or getting cash to fund your faction.